No matter what kind of government intervention would follow or problems arise, the hook was set in the government's choice of family, one able to be monitored and controlled in a secure, safe environment in Canada was established and realized. The laying of background for myself was as easy as establishing a birth certificate, some social service files, foster home, and a pediatrician to go along with the package, both to monitor and add credibility to the history, which was, of course, fabricated. The adoption would also allow for future government monitoring over the next few years. The major problem to overcome would be Robin's memories, should they surface. If a possible emotional bond could be established with someone acting as a mother or nurture figure, such as a supposed foster mother, then Robin may accept the newly implanted memories and fabricated histories and half-truths as his own, and no further problems might arise. No one suspected that I would remember my past, or that I would eventually come to understand my genetic history, be able to use the gifts which are inherent in my genes. Each cell in our bodies are with memory, and so I remember all injuries and insults to every inch of my body. Every scar is associated with a memory, and by understanding this, I'm able to see the faces of those who have used me. To each and all, I will hold you accountable. I will establish that all historical information as laid out by the government sources in Canada as well as the United States are incorrect and fraudulent, given as to hide my true identity as to who I am and where I originated from. I will show enough circumstantial evidence to the contrary and prove that the official version of my story, other than the adoption in 1966, never happened. That in fact, the United States government had instead stripped with the stroke of a pen a citizen of his inherent constitutional rights for the past 35 years. All of this not in order to protect a citizen and a human being, but rather to protect themselves, and out of greed and the lust to dominate in the future. A need to protect their work and the results of this genetic research. I am Ariel. I am my mom. I have returned, and I remember. By documenting the facts of my life along with what would seem to be very bizarre circumstances and incidents, you will begin to see a pattern emerge, which if one was to dwell on, would be terrifying in its implications for the human races. I will prove how I, Robin Ariel Webster, an American citizen since birth, have without my consent been stripped of my U.S. citizenship, privileges, and duties for 35 years, lied to, manipulated by the United States and Canadian governments, stripped of my name, and experimented on medically without my consent, as were other members of my biological family, in which I perceive the survivors to live in fear of the United States government. I was in fact originated in the United States in the state of New Mexico, stated as born of two American citizen parents, at least in the legal sense, whom neither had any legal status in Canada, yet I found myself at the age of 4 or 5 passed off as younger and adopted in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, in the year 1966. Both governments have tried to hide my family surname of Ross, my grandmother, and even to this day I find that name hard to find on official documentation. Not to say that I have not found it, that is why I find it hard to believe anything I've been told. On one document I find Ross, on the next it's blacked out or blank. This is very odd behavior for honest and trustworthy government. Do you not think so? On adoption records, the name of my mom's legal husband is missing, or it's blank. This being the same person who signed for my adoption in 1966, as stated on the official document of adoption in BC, Canada. Through a lot of time and research, I ascertained his name to be John Blythe Webster, and my legal father. He was known commonly as Blythe Webster. For the sake of argument, I have recognized Cleta June, Ross Prey Webster, and John Blythe Webster as my legal parents, neither parents of whom I have met and who are both dead of unnatural causes before the end of 1979. Much further on in my chronological life, I will be told that I was born of two mothers and no human father. Childhood Memories, Chapter 2. Now that you have some background information on me, Let's dive in. I'd like to start with my memories at approximately 6 years of age, year 1969, and I'll be progressing somewhat chronologically through my life, sometimes pulling subconscious memories into the surface or regressing to my past triggered by something from that period of chronological time we are talking about. The first memory I have of something unusual happening in my life was when my younger adopted brother Keith and I saw a bright light off the balcony of our home in North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We were doing the dishes and Mom and Dad were watching television downstairs in the den. We noticed this bright light approaching our house from the south. In our PJs, we went out onto the balcony to get a better look. Look at Look at the object. At that time, the noiseless object, without slowing, made a right-angle turn, moving east and away from us. We continued watching the object until it disappeared from our sight behind a local mountain range. A moment later, a glowing, pulsating red light erupted, lighting up the outline of the ridge. Believing that there had been a crash of a helicopter or a plane, I called the local Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment. And even though we kids were not to use the phone except in extreme emergencies or with the express permission of our parents, we thought this situation warranted breaking the rules. We did not really know what our mom would think, but I to this day believe we would have gotten ourselves in a lot of trouble had we told our parents. The police dispatcher told me to stop fooling around on the phone, so I hung up. I told Keith. They don't believe us. This was my first insight into how the government actually works. Years later, I would realize that the Canadian government and the RCMP were avidly documenting and covering up all UFO and related sightings in the area, and which were in fact, in conjunction with the United States military, being taken very seriously. Why then not document the sighting by a 6-year-old and witness? Could it possibly be that the child and the sightings were somehow related? Many years later, we will have another incident with a light and myself, and once again, the sighting will be covered up. There was, however, witnesses to the light incident of my childhood. The witnesses being Eileen Stiles and her daughter, Robin, of Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada. And in the early evening, they were out walking their dog in Burnaby when they spotted a red glow over the North Shore Mountains, and the circumstances of which are documented in a book called Aquarius. They correlate exactly as witnessed by my brother and I that very same evening so many years ago. There seems to be correlation between what was seen by Eileen Stiles, her book Aquarius, and my own history. For instance, my name is Robin, the same as her daughter and witness. The date on my birth certificate is February, as in Aquarius. Ariel means line of God, gift of God, or of or from the light. This depends on the exact interpretation of the name Ariel, A-R-I-E-L, yet that is indeed what we saw. She was out walking her dog, and I have been a dog lover all my life. In fact, I'm a professional dog trainer, among other things. Eileen Stiles and her daughter Robin both claim to have an ongoing relationship with aliens or extraterrestrial beings from the light. In 1969, she began an organization which now is known worldwide as the Light Affiliates. During this time, I was having dreams, many of which, even to this day, I do not wish to consciously recall. My brother Keith began to sleepwalk during the night, and he still does to the present day. The following incident, of which I have memory, happened only a few weeks later. I was playing with my Lego set in the living room of our home. I looked down and noticed a scar on my right leg, just above the knee, which had not been there before. I thought to myself, how did I cut myself? Not even realizing at the time the seriousness and the implications of such a wound, which at the time was already covered over with scar tissue. This same scar is still as visible and apparent in its strangeness today as it was then, more than 30 years later. Trying to rationalize this fact in my own mind rather than to place it as a terrible part of my dreams, I looked around and spotting an axe off one of my Lego cars, rationalized that I'd cut my leg on that piece of metal. The problem with this scenario is that since Lego is designed for young children, the axle itself is rounded and smooth, therefore not capable of inflicting an injury of such magnitude. The scar itself is approximately 2 inches long and in the shape of a hook or a J, and about a 1/4 inch wide. It must have been deep in order to be present in